What's up? Welcome to episode 8 of Politically Conscious. It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka mental activist. Got my brother Emille Bryant, political consultant, on this thing with me. We just found out our other brother Shelley Wynter is not feeling well today, so we're gonna rock this thing out.
Peace to my brother. Hope you're feeling better, man.
Yeah, no doubt. Do I sound pretty loud to you? You sound a little low to me. I don't know if that's on the station or not, but it's pretty low.
I'm using the headphones. I hope this is working okay, but I can fix my mic if I need to.
Okay, yeah, you sound low to me compared to in the past. So I don't know if you're doing something, if the headphones you're using are different than what you normally do. But just let you know that it definitely sounds low, just so you know. And I'm assuming it sounds low for people out there listening. All right, now I can't hear you at all. So just all right.
So how's this? Is better? Good mic?
Yeah, it's still pretty low, but it is what it is. So we'll see. Yeah, it's just definitely a little different than normal. All right, but with that said, y'all, we're gonna jump right into this thing like we always do. Our goal with Politically Conscious is to raise the consciousness of, if you will, the political mindset in our community by giving you informed, thoughtful dialogue that you're not going to see in the mainstream media, typically when it comes to how the mainstream media talks about politics. So in that sense, we're called Politically Conscious because we want to raise the consciousness, if you will. And so clearly there's a lot of news surrounding the Luigi Mangione, if you will, alleged suspect, alleged killer or murderer of possibly CEO Brian Thomas. He was found with the weapon, found with the manifesto. So just to go ahead and get that out the bag, if you will, we just want to jump right in and go at this thing, if you will. But if you will, before we kind of jump into that, let people know when you say political consultant, exactly what that means. Just give them the short version so they understand we're not just on this thing talking about politics with no perspective whatsoever.
Right. Veteran of the United States Air Force, since the 99 Pursuit Squadron behind me. And I have worked on congressional campaigns. I've consulted with senatorial candidates, gubernatorial candidates, and local candidates. They come to me for advice and counsel on speech writing and on insight into how to frame issues with different voter groups, especially those who look like us. So it allows me to get insight into politics as well as understand what the politicians are thinking, at least the ones who are trying to win seats.
So absolutely love that background. Again, picked you because of your political acumen, if you will. And ideally, we'll have you and Shelley on, if you will, to kind of have these perspectives from both sides of the aisle. In a sense, I kind of say you play the left, Shelley plays the right, and I like to moderate and consider myself an independent as well. So with that set up, let's go ahead and jump into this thing. And again, what we do, just to let anybody, if you're a first-time watcher of our show, we play political cuts that are floating around and just kind of offer our perspective again and insight into some of the things that you're going to see in the news, and try to offer more of a I would say realistic perspective versus the slant that the news might put on it. And so I think this very first cut is a very, in my opinion, a very obvious slant to the Luigi Mangione situation. So, he's been picked up, and there's kind of this political dialogue that's going back and forth of whether he's a political revolutionary based on his manifesto, and then others are saying he's just a straight coward. And so this cut kind of leads into some of the way that the news is framing it. We're going to play actually several cuts and get different perspectives on it. So let me play this first cut, if you will, Emille, and I'll get your response to the cut off top. Just so anybody knows, Emille hasn't seen this cut. He's reacting live in 3D, as I like to say, to this cut. So let's go ahead and play this one.
Later in the night, we're also going to talk about Penny and the verdict there. Mm-hmm. There you also have a victim who somebody determined did not deserve to continue living, right?
No.
Yeah, tell me which vigilante action is okay.
One is being proactive, right? So this kid who executed a guy walking away from him, shot him in the back, for no reason whatsoever. Daniel Penny is a hero. You could say anything you want. Talk to people who ride the subway every day. Because I do all the time. I do all the time.
So let me
I can't find anyone who rides the subway who's unhappy about this verdict.
Well,
Ouch.
Ouch.
Right. So look, first of all, I'm not going to condone what Luigi Mangione did. I definitely won't condone what Penny did. But here's why I'm frustrated, right? We always separate, we talked about this last week, we separate blue collar crime and white collar crime. And we have this problem in America that we frame things around this person didn't have this impact that this person did. So when Daniel Perry, as a vigilante, let's be very clear, he had that kid in a way that he was subdued. He had no reason to continue choking him to death. So that was one thing. The other thing is when Luigi Mangione did what he did, he had whatever logic was going on in his mind that solved a problem. Both of these men were vigilantes, and both of these men are guilty of murder, or at least seems like they're guilty of murder based on the facts I've been presented so far. But one of them is seen as a hero because he harmed a black kid who at worst was menacing, and we'll use that word loosely because he had been doing this for a long time. He was mentally ill, and mentally ill people often don't present like they should in a situation where people expect what would be considered calm. But he was not a menace in the sense that he had been doing this before and no one was harmed by it in the past. If they were harmed by it, he would have been arrested, but he wasn't. This Daniel Penny character took the law and took a life in his own hands, and he was rewarded with an acquittal. Meanwhile, Luigi Mangione killed someone who we don't know if he deserved it or not because we don't know his past life, but we do know that millions of his customers were affected by his decisions and decisions of his company. And those decisions resulted in billions of dollars of profit. And what I'm seeing is that there's a difference in how the young man on the subway was perceived as a menace and how the CEO of UnitedHealthcare was perceived as not a menace, despite the fact that one affected millions of lives and the other affected a few dozen on a subway. The people who harmed those men, one is seen as a folk hero, the other is seen as a folk hero. One is seen as is acquitted because he did somebody a favor, including what this disgusting commentator said. That he, if you've been on the subway, I've been on the New York subway many times, and I've seen really menacing people. And I still don't see the need to kill someone because of that menacing behavior. So the fact is that he doesn't get a chance to say that. And for many of our viewers who've been on the New York City subway, they have seen menaces too. And usually we just keep quiet, shake our heads, and keep it moving. If there is a problem, usually somebody will step in. And if not, we'll call the MTA authorities. So no, I don't want to hear all that. Luigi Mangione rightfully deserves to be punished, but don't look at one person who was a menace because he was bothering a few dozen people, and the other person is some sort of innocente because he, when he affected the lives of millions of people. Nah, we're not going to have that conversation. Not with me. No, sir. They both deserve to be, their murders need to be properly adjudicated. But I'm not going to hear nothing about one guy should have been acquitted and the other guy should be guilty. Nah, I'm not hearing that.
You're about to hear it right now, brother. Because I can't even believe that this comparison is even being made.
I agree.
No. I'm disagreeing with you, though. When I say being made, I feel like the guy on that, while I understand, like you said, you being aware of the subway and saying, hey, there's other methods that could have been used. That's what I hear you saying when it comes to Daniel Penny. I'm not disagreeing that there's other methods or that he didn't take it in his own hand. However, I will say a jury of peers have decided based on all of the facts of what happened that I can't say that I'm fully aware of as far as what the guy was doing on that particular day. I get, like you said, there is a history that had been done before. And so I think you're saying it from the perspective of this is no different than what he's done, and it didn't require him to be killed. And I'm not saying that he should have been killed. I'm not saying that at all. However, I think it is improper to compare someone who's been acquitted based on whatever level of menace that was being provided that day to somebody, again, like the guy said, walking away, being perceived as damaging America because of his high up position and literally getting shot in the back and murdered from behind. I don't think there is a comparison whatsoever. And I think it is a backwards way of thinking to even make that comparison by the sister who brought that penny into this conversation. I don't think they should be compared at all. It is a complete difference. And I think it is crazy that we would try to even make those two things equivalent.
If and I see your frame, and I respect that. And here's the problem I have with the frame. And I agree with you, but I'm going to talk about the frame for a second. The frame here is that these two killers, one of them alleged, the other for sure, are perceived as some sort of folk hero. So the only overlap we're going to have in this conversation, in this frame, is the folk hero-ness, the folk heroism aspect. Beyond that, there is no frame that binds them together. And what I'm willing to say is that the one folk hero who got acquitted did not deserve, based on the facts I've reviewed. Now, of course, those facts are different than what was presented to the jury, and
Absolutely.
Later we'll see what the jury has presented. But we have a history in this nation of knowing that white defendants get off of killing black victims. Right? That's not new in this country. In fact, it is relatively recent that any white person was convicted of killing a black person. So we don't have to wonder if the jury of their peers was fair. We can ask that question and legitimately have the historical precedent to make that true. At least we wonder, did they really see the entire story? Or was there something in the prosecution or something in the defense that swayed the jury, that has often swayed juries in the past, right? And so a menacing black man is already perceived as some sort of societal level, extinction level threat. That's nothing new. And that young man wasn't that physically imposing. He wasn't 6'8", 350 pounds. He was a rather slight individual comparatively speaking. So the physical aspect of that is suspect to begin with. And then the fact that you have someone who put him in a subdued position and just could have put him to sleep, but he didn't. He went beyond that. And nobody's saying it was an accident, right? It wasn't negligent that he did that. He intended to do that. And that's something that I think I need to see more from the jury to understand why they didn't see the fact that he could have stopped and chose not to.
No, fair enough. And to continue down the frame of understanding the legal aspect, the reality is, even though somebody can be seen as a folk hero, there's, to your point, typically some level of punishment, although minimal, just to highlight that we in society cannot take the law in our own hand. So for it to receive a full acquittal under the circumstances that you're talking about, like you're saying, a white man murdering a black man, there is definitely historical precedence for us to be concerned. So when I say I think you understood me. I don't think they should be equivalent. And I think we're saying the same thing there. But I am actually willing to concede everything you're saying makes absolute sense. And I understand why, as African Americans, we're like, what's up? And I'm willing to question the full acquittal in itself. You know what I mean? I'm definitely willing to go down that path 100% with you. That's not today's dialogue, but I do want to clarify in me disagreeing with you. And I think we're talking about that nuance in a way that it won't be done, and to be fair to even CNN, TV has a very small window. So if they were able to dialogue it out, the sister might bring in some of what you're saying into the full dialogue. But on a TV take, it just kind of gets put up as an equivalent, and that's why I disagree.
I want to emphasize you rightly called out the propaganda frame. I think that was a very clear mismatch in terms of what you're trying to convey from a position, right? Daniel Penny's acquittal in and of itself is enough to have an entire discussion. And then we can separate that from Luigi Mangione's execution of the UHC CEO, and we can have an entire discussion on that, because there is an entire discussion to be had as to why so many people are, at the very least, not upset about this murder, because there's something there that people need to talk about. But to have those two smashed together in a 60-second segment, to me, does a disservice to both. And I think you rightly call out the propagandistic element, which is they don't belong in the same conversation.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here for. So if you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. Now, unfortunately, again, Brother Shelley's sick, so he's not with us, but I have a cut from him, and he's giving his perspective on this thing, and I'll let you react to it as well. All right, let's play this one real quick from Brother Shelley.
Good morning, everybody. So let me get this straight. Luigi Mangione just, I guess some Ken Klippenstein dropped a part of his manifesto, and where he says that America has the lowest life expectancy, and basically we're dying younger than everybody else. Our food is unhealthy, our air is unhealthy, and these healthcare companies are screwing us around. That's essentially what he said. And the left is cheering for this guy, a guy who's a cold-blooded murderer who deserves nothing less but the death penalty and goes straight to hell. Shot a man in the back in cold blood. And the left is cheering for this guy. Yet, these same people, when RFK Jr. said the exact same thing and partnered up with Donald Trump to make America healthy again, these same people called RFK Jr. a whack job, a conspiracy theorist, crazy, insane. So they knocked the guy trying to make America healthy again, but they cheer for a cold-blooded murderer who was mad that America had the lowest life expectancy on the planet. Oh, okay. So your Trump derangement syndrome is so strong that you voted against the guy who put a guy on his team who wants to make America healthy again, saying the exact same things that Luigi Mangione is saying, but you cheer for a cold-blooded murderer.
So obviously, I wish I could holler at Shelley about what he had to say.
Beyond that,
yeah. But what I'll say is people say this all the time. Two things can be true. So while I'll still call RFK a wacko and conspiracy theorist, I absolutely agree with Shelley in the sense of the context that people will because of political leanings, if you will, they'll see these things as separate. But I think Shelley is making a great point when he highlights that, to a degree, what's in the manifesto is a lot of what RFK is pushing, being moved into the position that we just talked about on a couple of shows ago when we were talking about Trump's pick. And, again, I berated the RFK pick just out of disqualification, in my opinion, so as someone who takes a very scientific approach to science. Sure. And I'm like, how are we putting this guy in? But I have to agree with Shelley's logic when it comes to what Luigi is talking about. But based on RFK being on one side of the aisle, there are people who are dogging him out and calling him a wacko, but then siding with what Luigi is putting in the manifesto. Shelley's right, in my opinion, in that the ideas that are being professed by both are very similar. So it doesn't make sense from that standpoint. But again, I'll close with RFK is still a wacko and conspiracy theorist to me, but I agree with the logic that Shelley is laying out from a political standpoint. Your thoughts, brother?
So look, there's an old Venn diagram, right? And the Venn diagram is there's an overlap. And so there's some overlap between RFK and Luigi Mangione. So to say that they perceive some of the same things is absolutely true. If you take, and I know this is a big take, so I'm going to ask some grace from the audience. But if you take the murder off the table and then ask President Biden to select Luigi Mangione to run HHS, everybody would agree that's crazy because he's not qualified to run the HHS. So even though he has a very legitimate view about how the American healthcare and nutrition system and farm systems are operating, we wouldn't pick that guy, especially now that he's been accused of murder. But at any point, would we say that this person should run because of these views, HHS. So when I hear this conversation, I get a little frustrated because, listen, nobody is saying that RFK isn't entitled to observe correctly the effect on big businesses had on our health. Right. That is 100% true. But to say that Venn diagram, that overlap between the two is enough to say that this one person should be considered a villain and this person should be considered a hero, I don't think that's a good use of the Venn diagram. I do agree with him that the left celebrating this is problematic. I think there is a problem there because as much as we use the term pitchforks to articulate that the billionaire class, the elite, really highly elite level class in this country are doing things to this nation that are going to make people so frustrated, pitchforks and torches are going to be the result. So I look at Luigi Mangione as a pitchfork. He's what would happen if you do not pay attention. That doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it fair. It doesn't make it just. But what it does make is real. And what's real is he's either a harbinger or he is an anomaly of the system. And we're not sure which. Right. So if he's a harbinger, other pitchforks are going to come out, and they may not come out necessarily in terms of bullets and guns. They may come out in court cases and other things where the people are beginning to rebel against the system where they feel exploited without any sort of return on that exploitation, like better healthcare, better life expectancy. Meanwhile, on the other side, you have RFK, who rightly is calling out big problems, but also is bringing a whole lot of other baggage into HHS. I don't think those two belong in the same conversation, except for that overlap in the Venn diagram.
I love that perspective, and I agree 100% with you, if you will, brother. Let's keep talking about how far we're going with the propaganda, because I agree with you as well when you say, celebrating this guy is kind of a whole nother thing, right, for those that are. And so here's even if I would say an even worse propagandized take than what we saw for the first one, and I'll get your response to this as well.
Later in the night, we're also going to talk about Penny and the verdict there.
Sorry, same. I prayed the same. Here.
Let's get loud for Kyle Rittenhouse.
Murder, assassination, vigilantism. It's wrong, it's evil, it's despicable. There's no hero. Cheering for the murder of an unarmed man is beyond sick.
For anyone that sympathizes and empathizes with a murderer, that is completely upside down in our American society. There are people that need to reevaluate their inner soul and their moral compass. Yeah. There is nothing acceptable to me about that.
Wackos are treating suspected killer as a folk hero. Actual praise for the murder itself.
To sympathize with them, it's just disgusting.
You know, they have a Bonnie and Clyde syndrome in the DSM-V4 in psychiatric treatment, and that's when some people are enamored by criminals.
You don't have the right to go out and kill somebody and take, vigilante justice into your hands. So I think it's really disturbing to people across the country as they tune in and hear, people excited and saying there's joy from this. I think it's really concerning.
So that's from The Daily Show, basically doing a collage of, if you will, the celebration of Kyle, right, Rittenhouse, versus, and what's being said about Luigi, if you will. I detest what The Daily Show did, Emille. I detest it from this perspective. That, again, I don't think these things should be put, and again, to me, this is what propaganda is. So it's a willingness to just say, instead of just calling out what's wrong, we go find a comparative thing to make ourselves right. Right. And I'm talking about that's what The Daily Show is doing in this case. I'm not, as always, I'm not on a side. I'm just telling how I view how that is bastardized, if you will, to highlight. Again, I don't think the cases are similar when, again, obviously acquittal, possibly for some of the same reasons that Penny, if you will, that you've already alluded to, right? I will say, having looked specifically into the case all the way into the public files and everything, I do think it was self-defense, but it's not why I have this take. Again, I think just the attempt to go make an equivalent just to call out the other side instead of saying Luigi in his manifesto has real issues that we can talk about. We could have that discussion without pedalizing or making him a hero in any aspect. Now, I get how someone who doesn't have time or pay a lot of attention could easily do it without much forethought. But for it to be done within our media is too far for me. And all that take I just saw was just a take to say, well, look at what they did. And I hate that type of propaganda coming to the American people when it comes to politics. I don't want to be arguing over whether he should be pedalized or as a folk hero versus having the real dialogue about what's going on in our healthcare system, which is what I want to do after this. But I want to give your perspective on why I completely disagree with what the Daily Show did in that situation.
So my biggest frustration with the American news media is that it's for profit. And you will see me talk about this over and over again. At one point, the news media was about a public service. You rent these stations, rent the airwaves. They belong to the people as a payback in service as well as in money for that use of the airwaves. They should be presenting the day's events in a way that makes sense to the people watching. When the Daily Show does this, they're not a news organization, but to your point, them being despicable, it normalizes vigilante justice, right? This is the problem I have with this entire conversation. It normalizes vigilante justice. And the problem with vigilante justice is that, especially as Black people in America, it almost never goes our way.
Never.
It almost never goes our way. So Black people in America have suffered from vigilante justice for for the entirety of this nation's existence and before. So to have this conversation that legitimizes vigilante justice is all wrong. Here's what I think they should have done. They should have rightly called out, this is a problem, period. Period. And now, more importantly, the fact is that the Law and Order Party, right? The Law and Order Party has at one of its most important conferences, a hip hop introduction to a vigilante killer. You can't tell me that's not dripping with irony in and of itself. Enough irony that I can do an entire segment on just that part. Right? I don't need to say a word about Luigi Mangione or how the left is doing this, because I'm going to condemn the left for celebrating a killer too. And again, if you go back to what I said earlier, the thing that makes him so important is he a harbinger for the pitchforks to come, or is he an anomaly that we need to rightly look at and say, oh my God, why would someone do this? But in either case, there's no reason to say, hey, look at the hypocrisy of the right. No, the right's wrong, period, dot, have a nice day. The left's wrong, period, dot, have a nice day. We should have conversations about why they're wrong. Because if we're celebrating vigilante justice, more people are going to think that's how they're going to earn their fame. And the last thing we need is people deciding by themselves that they're Batman.
It's like you said, with the history of this country, it's never going to be a win for us. And again, we're talking about being politically conscious here. So let's dialogue about the real conversation, since if this is some type of symbolic gesture by Magione, his real motive is just because of how he looks at healthcare. Let's talk about, in a sense, what needs to be talked about. People are frustrated with the American healthcare system, if you will. And so, some of the aspect of us, if you will, being the lowest life expectancy, just to put that in context and in perspective, what we are, or we do have, as the United States, we do have the lowest life expectancy of our peer countries, if you will, the term that's typically been used in the past. I haven't heard it much recently in the media, but developed countries, again, that's just to give context. So we're not necessarily the lowest in the world, because sometimes the way it's said, people might think we have the lowest expectancy in the world, but we're 49th in the world, not saying that that's a great number, but the worst is we're headed in the wrong direction, and by 2050, we're expected to fall to 66. So we're not headed in the right direction, just to put things in perspective. And so for people who are frustrated with healthcare and for whatever reason, I shouldn't say for whatever reason, but are even liking Luigi as some type of folk hero because of his quote unquote motive, if you will. There are real issues in our healthcare system. And the other aspect of it is we pay more for healthcare than all our other high income peer countries. So there are definitely real issues that should be of concern. I'll let you kind of jump in there, and I got some more numbers as well. I just wanted to give that context because sometimes it gets thrown out as though we have the lowest expectancy, and we're far from that. We're actually, I think, around 80 years or 77 years old, 80 years as a country altogether or whatever. That's the life expectancy or whatever. So relatively high compared to the countries that are below us, if you will. But yes, we're 49th in life expectancy in the lowest of developed countries. Go ahead, brother.
So this is a problem with a lot of the comparisons, right? America is an incredibly heterogeneous nation, right? So we are, people call us a melting pot, rainbow, whatever. But the point is that you have these very clearly segmented populations, segmented by race, segmented by socioeconomic status. Life expectancy in America for Black people is much lower than the average in America, right? And so if you were to take a look at the average, we might fall well below 49th for Black people in America. And if you were to look at the Asian population in America, it would fall well above 49th. So that average doesn't tell us a whole lot. And it doesn't tell us a whole lot about our healthcare system, except for that the money we put in does not result in the life expectancy out. Now we can have these conversations about healthcare disparities. We can also talk about food deserts in different neighborhoods. We can talk about who's pushing what diet, why a McDonald's might be more accessible than a farmer's market in certain neighborhoods across the country. These are all holistic healthcare issues that need to be looked at by the segments that are most affected in America versus an overall perspective. Now, here's the other part that I think is really something that's sort of hidden in the numbers. You talk about this in another context. I will bring that context to this discussion. Black people in America paid taxes and had their taxes robbed from them when they weren't given the same services for which those taxes should have been spent. Now, if we say that about healthcare, Black people are putting money into a healthcare system, but they're not getting out of the system parity in terms of healthcare outcomes. In other words, we're being shortchanged or stolen from because we're putting more into the system than benefits out of the system. Our benefits seem to matriculate to a population who needs them less, and the people who need those benefits most don't seem to be getting those benefits, though they're paying into the system consistently. So now we have a different conversation to have, which is which part of America are we going to focus our effort on? What Luigi Mangione was talking about is writ large, the healthcare system. He's not wrong to be frustrated with that healthcare system. It doesn't work for all of us, but it's not working for some of us a lot more than it's not working for a few of us. So now we have another conversation, which is which income bracket should we really focus on if we wanted to change healthcare outcomes?
Good stuff. Let me share a few more numbers again, just to give more context. And I also want to give a perspective that I don't think is really ever shared when it comes to, if you will, I'll say demonizing our healthcare system is kind of the perspective. And I think the majority of Americans say, to a degree, may say there is an issue, if you will, right? But let me just share a few more numbers. So according to Commonwealth Fund, the U.S. is the only high-income country that does not have some form of universal health insurance. Nearly 30 million of Americans are uninsured, and about 40 million are not fully covered by their health plans, leaving them at risk of prohibitive costs. For context, the U.S. population is estimated, we're around 330 million. Speaking to the actual years by race, because you mentioned that, Brother Emille. So Asians right now in America, the Asian community expectancy is 83.5 years, Hispanic is 77.7, white is 76.4, and significantly lower is Black at 70.8, and American Indians and Native Alaskan Natives have the lowest at 65.2 years of life expectancy. So you've already kind of, in a sense, made that point. Here's the part, And I'm going to share Japan, who has the highest life expectancy. I'm going to share a little blurb about them as well, from the same people, if you will. But the one thing that we fail to highlight when we talk about the healthcare system in itself is literally the American diet. The American diet in itself creates more of these issues than, if you will, the healthcare system in itself. I ever do hold, personally, I will say this from my perspective, I do hold it as an indictment to our healthcare system that all of the other quote unquote developed countries have figured out universal healthcare. And I remember talking to Brother Shelley about, we were just kind of rapping about we were going to have this conversation. And so as much as he said, hey, there are some issues with healthcare, I said, well, you do realize, I said, this thing crosses party lines. I said, you do realize you support the party that keeps us from having universal healthcare. And when we talk about healthcare costs, you are supporting someone who pushes for open markets. And so what I do know absolutely happened during Trump's last administration is, for example, medicine shot high up cost-wise. And Biden and Harris were able to come in and put some perspective and lower it back down, which benefit a lot of our elderly African Americans in the country and other poor people. So that was a reality. So as much as people can kind of say the healthcare is an issue, we're not always being honest about that. The issues with healthcare falls across both party lines, and it's not just one way or the other, if that makes sense. I'll let you just jump in some thoughts, and then I want to share what Japan does, what I think is something that we could also follow. But let me just get your thoughts before I share the Japan.
For sure. So single payer healthcare or universal healthcare is something that other industrialized nations have solved because it makes sense to them to do so. And part of the challenge that we're faced with in America is that we've become a caveat emptor country, right? Buyer beware country. So what we've told ourselves through the last probably 150 years since the Civil War is that it's more and more important that the individual take responsibility for their health, for their nutrition, right? A company is losing lots of liability, the potential for liability when they use certain drugs, certain pesticides and herbicides. They don't seem to have as much liability as what happens to me as the consumer. So this caveat emptor mentality has gotten more and more skewed toward the consumer. At the same time, consumer education has gotten less and less sophisticated. Right. So now we have this problem where the individual is less educated on what makes their health, and the organizations that provide nutrition are getting more and more sophisticated in what they are adding to our food. Then you have a mediator who is skewed toward the companies by way of the FDA, the USDA. So what RFK Jr. rightly called out is that this skew going toward companies has affected our overall healthcare. They're able to do more to our food at the source using pesticides and herbicides and synthetic fertilizers and the genetically modified organisms, GMOs, or genetically engineered foods. All of that skews the conversation so that me as the buyer, as the consumer, I have less and less resource to understand or be able to discriminate what foods I should be putting in my body. So now you throw on top of that this layer of so now we have poor education and we have a skewed system toward the companies that are providing the food. And now we have advertising, marketing, and all the things that go on top of that, which skews even further toward the companies and their massive resources. Meanwhile, I'm trying to get educated, and I'm finding fewer and fewer open resources. And my government, which is supposed to be advocating for me at least as much as advocating for business, is now tainting my ability to make a good decision because it creates a food pyramid that was influenced by lobbyists. It's creating a food pyramid that doesn't include that GMOs may be harmful to either our environment or my health. They're not including the possibility that pesticides and herbicides and antibiotics might not be the best way to raise the food sources and the food that I need to consume. So when you have all of those things arrayed against me, the individual consumer, and yet I'm supposed to make a better decision, you have the potential for a completely misapplied healthcare system, i.e., it's trying to fix problems that probably wouldn't exist if, in fact, if we had the food that we needed to eat in the first place that was not genetically or chemically modified the way it is. So we have a couple of different conversations happening simultaneously, and I want to break those down a little bit more so we can be really clear about which aspect of healthcare we want to talk about, because although healthcare is holistic, these conversations are not.
No, absolutely. And what happens is it's a quote from Thomas Sowell that I love to use or whatever, but even to put in what you just said into another context, because there's give and take in all of this. The give and take is, in 1950, worldwide life expectancy was around 55 years old. And so there have been a lot of benefits to the very, inside of the system that we now may decree is saying it's all bad or it's all against us. But in the meantime, the give and take is even inside of our system, they start taking out pesticides or because of our country, it won't be done, because of our way our government is set up, it may not be done across the board, but then one company gets to advocate, we don't use pesticides and you can have our stuff. So it's always done kind of in an open market perspective. And the open market perspective is why it's the fight for why we don't have universal health care like all of our peers, right? It's always this back and forth. Here's one of the benefits of our open market. And again, this is not me advocating for big companies. It's just realizing it's not as easy as saying it's all bad against me or it's all good one way or the other. But one of the benefits of our open market is some of those very countries that are ahead of us, they came and tested their market, their medicine in our open market because it's quicker to get things in the market because of our capitalistic society to even find out if the thing they're using in their country will work. We have the market and the innovation to get some of the very same technologies that now expand life expectancy around the world, i.e., GMO modified food. The world used to be much poorer until GMO foods were able to be spread around the world and feed countries around the world. This is me not defending GMOs. It's just giving another perspective that quite often the conversation is so simplified to the point where we'll say our health system is all bad. I am willing to challenge. There is, in my opinion, no reason we shouldn't have some form of universal health when all of our peer countries that, do have one. I think that's an indictment in itself. Here's something to hear about why Japan, if you will, is the number one life expectancy in the world. And this is just a little quick blurb, and we'll get off this conversation, if you will. But this is what I found. It says, a person's lifespan is influenced by many factors, including genetics, lifestyle, and access to healthcare. Diet is an important element of Japan's preventive approach to healthcare. The population has a much lower rate of red meat consumption compared to the U.S. and tends to eat a lot of fish and plant foods such as soybeans and tea. According to Aetna, Japan not only has instituted campaigns to reduce salt consumption and moderate blood pressure with medication, but also boasts strong childhood vaccination programs and universal health insurance. Japan's aging population is also known for staying active, which may contribute to better health for the elderly. I love that blurb, and here's the reality of that blurb. When things get politicized when it comes to healthcare in our country, there'll be this argument over whether we should be vaccinated or not after what happened with COVID, right? But when we say, well, what does Japan do in our politicized country, there will be argument about absolutely what they do. But I'll go as far as to say they highly encourage eating more vegetables than we ever encourage to their children. They make them try so many different vegetables that their palates are lean towards that as adults, something that we're not always cognizant of. A downfall of our capitalistic society is why you can go in the grocery store and the sweet cereals are at children's level. That's how marketing can happen in our country because of capitalism, if you will, but that wouldn't be advertised there because of what their focus is as a society when it comes to healthcare, diet, and exercise. You as an individual, to your point, is kind of left to us in our country, can do those very same things, and you wouldn't have some of those outcomes. But I would also say the biggest factor, which was highlighted in the number I put earlier, 30 million people without coverage at all, and another 40 million without full coverage. In those countries, while they're focused on diet and exercise, they still fully cover their people. That's the overall landscape of how we could increase life expectancy, but we get politicized and start and willing to put an RFK who's going to probably go after the vaccination program just based on his background, which is crazy as hell. Because when I highlighted life expectancy in 1950 worldwide was in his 50s, the reasons it's in the 80s right now is strictly because of vaccination.
100%. So I lived in Japan for 2.5 years, during my service to the nation. And one of the things I learned about them is they have so many different things that keep them alive longer. But there's not only that they're alive longer, they have a higher quality of life later in life, right? So not only are they living longer, but they're living better at the end of life. Most of the healthcare costs in this nation is geared toward end-of-life costs. Let's be very clear. Those end-of-life costs are crazy, and they bankrupt families. Families that have built up what little generational wealth they can is spent on end-of-life care. It's an awful, awful system that I would love to see change. And one of the things that Japan knows very well, and unfortunately for them, it's become somewhat of a problem, is they have figured out how to live longer lives, but they didn't figure out how to increase the birth rate. So Japan is slowly dying because it's slowly aging. Mm-hmm. So there's a good and a bad with both of those. But on the backside of that, there's another conversation that I think we need to have in this nation, which is, what's the good science around longevity? What is the good science around longevity? And the Japanese are one of several societies that have done this. If you study blue zones around the world, you understand that blue zones are in Okinawa, Japan. They're also in Greece, and they're in Loma Linda, America, California.
Yes.
Right? Yes. And that conversation we're not having, because those folks are Seventh-day Adventists, and those folks are primarily vegetarian or eat very little red meat. And they also have something that all the blue zone folks tend to have, which is ikigai. That's a Japanese word that means the purpose for one's life or the reason why one wakes up. So when you start adding these things up, the American healthcare system is missing so many of these elements. And this is the problem. When we talk about how the entire world's lifespan has gone up, it started to plateau, mostly because in America, we started seeing the rise of these different ways of marketing these poor foods. If you go back to World War II, at the end of World War II, the Netherlands and America had the same basic height of their average height of their people. Even when you normalize and remove immigration from the equation, the Dutch average height is still significantly higher. And when they studied this and figured out why is that so, the Dutch is nutrition. The Dutch focused on nutrition after World War II. Very, very pointed to try to get their people to eat very healthy because they didn't have as much food. So they needed to make sure whatever they provided was healthy. So their average height shot up. Their average life expectancy also shot up. So now we have a conversation in America that we had a peer who was, relatively speaking, devastated versus the prosperity that America had after World War II, and their average height goes up, their average life expectancy goes up, and ours stagnates. It did go up. It went up significantly, but not the same. And then we have the other question that we argued earlier, which is, why are we so stratified in America? Why are Native American and Alaska Natives way at the bottom?
Right.
And why are Asians way at the top in a nation that has supposedly equal access to the abundance of the nation, right? So now we can have a really robust conversation. And I don't think vaccines are the answer in any of this. I know people want to argue about that, but I always go to the people that I call America's enemies, right? People that America calls enemies, Cuba and, Russia. They developed vaccines independent of anything America did. They developed their own vaccines.
Right.
And Cuba's vaccines were actually better than America's, better researched, better executed, and they worked better overall for their population. That little tiny country was able to figure out the vaccine problem with resources far smaller than America's. And yet we're still talking about vaccines in a nation that is, like you said rightly, the innovator of these things, the innovator of mass approaches to public health. Now, we have a completely skewed system in America that we need to have many, many conversations to address.
No, absolutely. And just to highlight, and this is something that people don't want to accept, but to a degree, like you said, the pyramid, the food pyramid, just throw this out. We're going to move on. But it was definitely, historically, we know it was unfairly influenced by the milk industry, right? Like that's the history if you go look it up or whatever. But it also, here's the give and take of it. But the reality is, if you follow it, you won't have a lot of these issues. I'm just talking about that even with the undue influence, what we'll do is we'll go, oh, it had undue influence, and we'll throw it out and eat McDonald's every day. Like that's what I'm just saying. We go to extremes.
Yes.
When for the most part, once you recognize, okay, here's the undue influence, you can actually go research what's legit, what's not out of the undue influence and realize, oh, well, if I follow most of this, I'll be healthy and won't have to worry about, or go do what they do in the blue zones because you are capable, to your point, the party, the area in California are proving that you can live that way and not be beset with all of these issues. But the other back end, how I'll keep highlighting this, is we still have people without just the preventative care that you get with universal health care. That's what's causing a lot of the issues. And so obviously those who lack, whether it's the red states, whether it's African Americans, or those who have lacked access because of money, then they're not getting a lot of preventative care. That's what leads to some of the later issues. On the flip side, our country is set up that even if you haven't, in a sense, done your part and put into Social Security, if you will, I'm just talking about a benefit just to highlight this because we like to give full context. But was fortunate enough, I had a family member that we didn't have the money to take care of them at the end, and in our system they had to be taken care of. So I'm just saying there are gives and takes versus just demonizing everything one way or the other and just shooting to the extremes. If you want to make one last thought on that, sounds like you do. Go ahead and play one more clip before we go out and change the direction.
I'll make this brief, but to your point, and this is something that I think we as Americans really need to understand. We have power that we do not exercise, and that power is multifaceted. That multidimensional power is with our wallets, with our votes, with our choices in the kitchen, and with our choices outside of our homes, right? So I don't have to live 11 miles away from where I work. I can choose to live closer, but many of us don't want to take the bus or walk. That's okay. I understand if you live in Chicago or Detroit or Portland, Maine, where you might not want to walk in 20 below weather. But at the same time, we have to have these discussions as to what lifestyle choices we're being driven to make. Oh, own your own home, but own your own home that's so expensive in the city center where you could walk everywhere. Oh, by the way, America is now a car-centric culture because we ripped out, thanks to GM, all of the trolleys and streetcars across most of the major cities in America back in the 1920s. There's lots of reasons why we can have these discussions, but the point is we need to have multiple discussions about these issues so we can start building a body of knowledge that informs the individual, because it's not going to be big corporations and apparently not big government that's going to regulate us into better health. They've done as much as they can do. Now it's up to us to figure out the difference, because as far as I can see, single payer healthcare is not an option for the incoming administration.
And personal responsibility, I usually hate that dialogue when it's used in a racial way. But when it comes to health, it's going to be your only choice for the reasons that you said. As much as you can do for your own health, preventive wise, how you eat, is how you will avoid even having to succumb to the downfalls of our system. So I will leave it at that. I want to play this cut. I found this week and I thought it was super, super interesting. So let me play this cut and get your thoughts.
You and Working Families Party are trying to do something very different than the other third parties. It feels like you are trying to grapple with that problem in the structure of American democracy and actually do a third party in the most strategic possible way to build for the long term. Do I have that right? And how would you contrast it with some of the other third parties? Not asking you to talk shit about anybody, but what makes you guys different, and what do you say to people who are in that very angry, toxic debate that it comes up every 4 years and never goes anywhere?
Okay. So I believe as an organizer, my job is to tell the people the truth, to tell the people the truth about the power that we have and the power that we need. Our feet are planted in the world as it is, but our gaze should be towards the world as we want it to be. Right. And so what that looks like for us as a party is to say the truth, that this system that none of us created doesn't create the options that we want. We don't believe that living in a world where you have unlimited choices of butter, but only 2 choices for president is satisfactory, right? We get that, but we live in that world. And if we want to change it, we don't just change it by moralizing about how bad it is. We change it by organizing enough power to change the structures of our government, which is what the far right did in the mid-70s. They understood, they lived in a world that they did not want to live in. And they understood that they had to build power, they had to build organization, and they had to run a plan. And so a party, in some ways, is a practice of building power together, building organization together, and running a long-term plan for governing together. And that means accepting today the fact that we have these barriers. And if we're really upset with those barriers, and we really believe that the 2-party system, as rigid as it is in the United States, that they are fundamentally undemocratic, then that will build in us the stomach to do the hard organizing to change those systems, rather than say, as an individual, I'm mad at the system, and so I'm going to protest against the system with my vote. And this is a protest vote. I know it's not going to change the system, but I want to, as an individual, mark my displeasure with the system. I rather build the power to dismantle and rebuild the system in our image, which is a much harder long-term task. And to me, that's the task of political parties. Political parties are not just there to make a point. Political parties are ultimately designed to govern. And so if you really believe that, then you have to show the steps. You have to show the steps to make that happen. And we try to, in the open, show the steps to the people that we want to organize on how we're going to make that happen. And so for us, it means on the local level, on the state legislature level, trying to recruit as many independent people into our fold and getting them into governing positions. It means in places like Philadelphia, where there's interesting little sort of hacks where we could actually run our own people because there's minority party set-asides. We get our people elected. It means in places like New York and Connecticut and Oregon, where we have fusion voting, we use the fusion voting law to have our own party line. And it means...
Maurice Mitchell, he's my hero, Emille.
He was speaking of straight facts. So here's the...
Let me say this real quick before I let you go.
Go ahead.
My hero, he calls me out from this standpoint. I always claim to be independent, but when I see this clip, I've definitely been the person who's demoralized and voted third party to voice my displeasure, as he said. I've absolutely done that. Part of me doing it, there was some methodology to it. I'll say, not just simply I'm mad at the system, right? And I don't always vote third party. I'm just saying I do and I've done it. But what I'm highlighting is matter of fact, one of the brothers that's watching, he's making comments. James, he and I used to have this dialogue all the time. So shout out to James for always listening to Politically Conscious, watching, I should say. I'm got to get used to being on video now. But with that said, because I always understood one thing, that if the independent vote ever got to 5% in a general election, that was the number that will require a third party now be on stage for the next general election. That whatever idea that 5% was the number that we needed to get to in order to have what I would say different conversations, because you know how much I hate the political narratives that are pushed over the facts. The narratives are just to get you to vote. The narratives are just catered to make you vote. They're just catered to your emotions, and they're not always telling you the truth. And I always thought that if we had a third party up there, now the dialogues would have to be more robust about what the facts are. So that was my thinking. And the reality is, as much as I wanted that, we still never, in my lifetime, I think once the third party vote might have got to 2%. I forget which election it is, but it usually stuck at 1%. So
it was Ross Perot.
Yeah, it was the Ross Perot one. That was it. Yep, that was the one in my lifetime.
Bill Clinton wouldn't have won if Ross Perot wasn't there.
So only once in our lifetime has it really been effective. And now to give credit to James, who's always pushing back, saying that's worthless to do or whatever. Then I see this brother who I watch, and I know, for example, the history of the Republican Party. That's exactly what they did to become viable when it was the Democrats versus the Whigs in the first so many elections. The Republicans did exactly what they did to become the party that one of their edicts was to end slavery when they first started. The first time they met, I think in Ohio, with maybe 50 people, they did exactly what he's talking about doing. They built locally and became a viable party. And what I do love the most about what Maurice says is, I've always, as much as I may have protested with in a general election, because locally I'm always trying to pay attention. So I'm not using the third party thing loosely in a local election. Let me make that very clear about my own stance. But in saying that, the thing that I've always said to those who just want to eventually bow out, we've already talked about that on this show, bow out and not do anything. I'm like, there's only one way to play, and you have to govern yourself. I talk about that in my book, Re-Education of the Negro. So bowing out is not going against the system, being a part of the system, and it's going to take hard steps like Maurice, this guy, is talking about. I've got to look this brother up because I want to be a part of the working family political party based on him doing the things that a party has to do, and it is how you change structure. There is no other way to play, even though people moralize and get on the internet and say a bunch of things that in fact are never going to make it better for you, because you're getting taxed. You should get something from it. Bottom line. Go ahead, Emille.
So in 1912, Teddy Roosevelt ran with the Bull Moose or Progressive Party and actually got 27% of the vote over William Howard Taft, 23%, who was the other major party candidate. So a third party running a strong candidate in an election for president has shown it can be done. And that was a time when things were weird. The Bull Moose Party was absorbed into the Republican Party, and we have some history since then. But the real question that he's answering is, what's the vision for a third party? Is it to disrupt? No, it is to govern. And that, to me, is the linchpin to the conversation. Almost always, there's no clear governing plan for a third party. It is, those two guys suck, vote for us because we're different, which is great if you need to feel good. But if you want to see governance, you got to see people thinking about the local level, the state level, the county level, the tri-county commission level, all the way up to the presidency. And a viable third party will not take the presidency until you see more third parties in all of those lower echelons of government. Because the trouble is, the powers that be today are addicted to money. That's not the only thing they're addicted to, but that's the most visible thing they're addicted to. And that money is coming from large donors on both sides of the current political aisle, right? So you have Bank of America and you have IBM and all these other people who are double dipping and sending money out to both parties because they know whoever's in power will be more likely to hear their conversation, right? Those parties are also emboldened by dark money, meaning they can advocate for issues without exposing who they are. So now you have another entity that's pushing using money. So you can have a lot of money in these conversations. And here comes a third party that says governance is our key. We believe in governance. So now the question is, can they defeat these big money interests? And the answer to me is unequivocally yes, but it takes massive organizing, which the brother Maurice was talking about. And he's talking about a long-term plan, 20, 30, 40 years hence, meaning building up something. So when we have a conversation, let's say for healthcare, we're not going to affect healthcare overnight. We saw what happened when President Obama pushed that with the Democratic Party in for the Affordable Care Act. And what happened was there's this big backlash for multiple reasons. I went all the way back to the HMO Act of 1973. Before the HMO Act of 1973, America was on its way to a single payer system. And then the HMO Act of 1973 actually disrupted that and turned our healthcare system into more of what it is today. So if you ever need to look it up, you should look it up under the Government Accountability Office's website. You'll find a 15-page PDF that is from 1978 that talks about the effect of that that implementation of that law. Why is this important? Because there was a track on which the nation was going until a big money interest decided to take it off that track. And that big money interest affects our health 50 years hence. So imagine 50 years from today,
right,
a working family parties is able to disrupt not the 2028 election, but the 2078 election. And people are like, I can't wait 50 years. Well, it took 50 years to get here.
It took the Republicans 100 years to end slavery.
It took a lot of things, a lot of time to get to where they were.
But
so we have to be more,
in context.
We can't just be reactive. Oh, I can't stand these two political parties. They suck. I'm going to give my party my third. We were taught a long time ago in my political education, you take the least bad option if you can't find the most good option. That's the way I was taught. If you can't find the most good, take the least bad. Does that make it good? No, it makes it the least likely, as some people said, choose your enemy if you can't find an ally, right? And this is what the American system is for many of us. I'm going to pick the least bad option. Well, the other side of picking the least bad option is to create a better option. And that means you're going to have to go through a long, difficult process where the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have both put up very intentional barriers to third parties in every state. And if you don't want to knock those parties, if you don't want to knock those two down a peg, you're going to have to figure out how to dismantle those barriers or overcome them. You dismantle them by being a part of the system, and you overcome them by creating something new. Well, perhaps we need both.
Yep, and I'll just make one last stab at an issue that's near and dear to me. Speaking to this very issue is, I love the politicians that are not many, but are willing to denounce. What is it? Citizens United, because they jump between both parties, and it's being able to allow that corporate money, that dark money to come in, that there was still an American voice before Citizens United was allowed. And right now, both parties, generally speaking, most people, because it fills their own coffers, are for it. But there are some people that are against it. And so I would just say, for anybody that understands and willing to take this long-term approach, any politician that's against American United, vote for them. I don't care what's behind their name. But again, it's easier for me to do because I'm an independent.
For sure. I would echo that. And I'd also say, make sure that as we look at our choices in the future, we're evaluating them based on more than just the letter behind the name or even a single issue. And we talked about how some voters, we don't know their motivation. Right. All I ask is that the voters who care about multiple issues look at multiple issues. Right. Absolutely. So we can get more and more people to engage with something like the Working Families Party because they're looking at multiple issues.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And I just looked it up. I was wrong about the Republican Party taking 100 years. I looked at their actual start. It was 1854. And so, but the history of America, it took 100 years to end slavery if you go to the actual history. And so I shouldn't equate that 100-year with the Republican Party. So let me make sure I correct myself. I wanted to look it up and make sure I said it correctly. But with that said, once again, another great episode. Thank you for your time. We do these as pop-ups. We was here last Friday. So, Friday keeps working out. We might kind of fall into a regular time, but just stay tuned. Follow us on IG at mental_dialogue. Emille, if there's any public information you want to give out, please give it out now. We're going to shut this show down. But thanks again for another great show.
You can find me at myname.com if you want to learn more about me, or on LinkedIn. Again, my name. But more importantly, that you always look for the original source to all the information you're using. We love to see people learning about this stuff. Come to us to get through the propaganda and then leave us with at least one nugget that you can use for your own education.
I love it. All right, stay on to shut this down.